And
Yeah.
by the way, congratulations. I was out with my wife that night and I was listening to your spaces like in my ear, kind of pretending I was shopping with her and stuff. And then Elon came on and I was like, damn it. I was like, I would have been there
Yeah.
otherwise.
That was fun. No, it
Yeah.
was nice of Omar to allow me to throw in the question, because the question was
Yeah.
really, I mean, I think that's the most important one when it comes to like adoption of the software. I think Omar's questions were so good from a technical perspective, because it really helped us understand where they
Right.
are on that ramp. But ultimately, it comes down to, okay, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable with the software, they're not going to use it. So that smoothness, and how he said, hey, just wait and see how smooth it is, which I really couldn't, because the video
Right.
was,
Right.
Elon, we need to get your freaking video editor, bro. But it, the commentary was the mind-blowing part, and I think that's when
Yeah.
everybody is mind-blown by that, at least those that really follow the space closely and kind of like think through the implications of what just happened, and what's
Right.
about to
Right.
happen.
Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I am with Farzad Mesbahi today. He is a logistics guru, a former Tesla employee, and a huge YouTube and X personality. So thank you for being here. Farzad, I have my first question is one that is on the tip of everyone's tongue. Everyone wants to know, was it a mistake that Elon rebranded Twitter as X? Because that's the only thing that actually matters.
Oh man, well, thank you for having me on, John. It's always such a great time speaking with you. We've spoken many times before, both in person and on the channel. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you inviting me and being on your channel. And it's yeah, we just started with this was kind of came about on a X post, and then you and I kind of
Yes.
went back and forth. And then you're like, which one? I'm like, let's do it on yours, because you know a lot more about this stuff than I do. I figure your viewers are going to be really appreciate sort of your feedback on this. But man, I don't think it was a mistake. No, I don't think it was a mistake. Mainly because I really do feel that branding is overrated. What it really
Right.
comes down to, in my opinion, I'm not a branding expert, but when I think about branding, I'm like, okay, do I buy a thing because of what its name is? Or do I use a thing because of what its name is? Or do I use it because it's awesome? And if
Right.
it's awesome, then over time, that will overcome the reservations people may have with a name. Like, I understand that there's going to be a transitional phase. We see it everywhere. I mean, all the YouTube channels and shows that I watch, people have
Right.
to constantly say, oh, that person tweeted, I mean, posted on X. Oh,
Right.
I checked on Twitter. Oh, wait, on X. And, people
Right.
are frustrated. But over time, I think as the platform grows and it really becomes what it's meant to be, which is more than just media, I think the name will carry. And if the goal of that platform becoming one of the largest, if not the largest in the world, then people will have no other option but to call it by its name. But the transition is weird, just like with anything. The transition is
Yeah.
going to be weird. But
Yeah.
I don't think like I don't view it as a roadblock that's going to prevent the software from growing, or the platform from growing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even though Twitter's been around since 2008 or 9, it's a while back, but you can consider this early days for Elon's version of it. And so the rebranding makes sense now rather than waiting another year or two when it is much more solidified
Sure.
as Elon's Twitter. So I mean, I think if you're, and obviously he was going to do it from day one. He said it's going to be X. So it wasn't like any surprise to anyone. So I was asking that question relatively facetiously because, of course, the real question that everybody wants to know is about the full self-driving 12. And of course, that's why we got on and decided to talk about this. So I appreciate having you on here, and loved your thoughts on X, the posting, the posts, and of course, also the conversations that you have. And folks, if you don't follow Farzad on X and on YouTube, definitely check out the links in the description so you can, follow you. Because not only are you awesome, but you're also like one of the nicest people I know. And that's like
Oh
a
my
big
God.
bonus. Yeah, it's a really
Thanks,
big
man.
bonus.
Likewise.
Yeah. Hopefully
Likewise.
hopefully producer wife believes in that too. She feels that way too.
Yes.
There you go.
Producer wife somehow agrees with that statement. Otherwise, she wouldn't be married with me, thank
There we
God. And
go.
it's one of those things where yeah, I don't know how I got so lucky. But no, I appreciate that, man. And I same to you, man. You're one of the most approachable, nicest guys I've met in the community for sure. And I think what you do really well is because of your education background, you're able to communicate to the layman, or in a way that's very understandable, a lot of these technical advancements, or like things that are happening that might be a little bit tough to understand. Like I know that one video you made on that submarine incident that happened did really, really
Right.
well because
Oh
of how
yeah.
you were
Yeah.
able to explain what happened, you know? And I
Right.
think that's where a lot of your value comes from. So yeah, no, I really appreciate the work you do. And really I'm very interested in talking to you about this as well, because one of my goals with this version 12 thing is I really do feel, you know, we've talked about FSD coming. You know, we were talking in DMs before we came on. We've been talking about
Right.
FSD finally coming to fruition for a really long time. And you know, it's one of those things where it transitioned from Elon always saying it's very like it's just a few months away to very much it becoming, you know, the boy who cried wolf. And I
Right.
kind of see
Right.
this not just in circles outside of this super nerdy community, but
Right.
also within this sort of space, people are not buying the fact that it's actually it's actually here in a way. And
Right.
I completely understand that. I completely get that. I think the mentality of, well, show me first and then I'll believe you, I think it's a healthy one to have.
Right.
But it's also important to highlight that what it means to have a system that is where the AI is carrying most of the workload around the problem solving aspect of getting the car to drive around, I think is insanely massive, because you're no longer limited by brain power. You're now limited by how many chips you can string together. And
Right.
so when I think about it that way, it's like, okay, well, the limit is scale. And to me, it's like, okay, so now we're in the scale part. It's very analogous to the Model 3 thing, you know? Model
Right.
3,
Right.
they figured out how to make an affordable EV, but they had to push a bunch of cars to the factory to get it to
Right.
actually work. The way I think about FSD version 12 is the same. I would love to hear your thoughts. So where's your head
Yeah.
at with this?
So, well, I think first of all, like you were saying, and we were chatting about this before on X, and I feel like we also have to bear some guilt, and by we, I just mean like the entire sort of YouTube X Tesla
Yeah.
community of all of a
We're the
lot
ones
of
out
us.
here cheerleading it.
Yeah, we've all been, you know, and it's like in 2020, we're like, yeah, full self-driving beta, it's
Yeah.
here and it's gonna be awesome.
100%.
And so
100%.
each version we've been very breathless. And so I do agree. I think there's some exhaustion on the part of people who are not in the community, and even some people who are in the community. You can see that there's a lot of people on X that are, you know, interact with us that are like, no, I don't see it.
Yeah.
But I think the goal, the mission today is to try to explain why this time is different. So the broad brushstrokes are the car performed about as well as the version that we're driving right now, you know, 11.4. Whatever, that you have that too, I'm sure. But you know,
Yeah.
so we're driving that version around, but this new version 12 is a complete rewrite, now obviously utilizing a lot of the stuff that they learned and that the architecture and things like that, but it's a full rewrite, and it drove as well as the version that we have now. And so, you know, you have to think of this as a really early development build, and the fact that we didn't take that many steps backwards, and yeah, there was the one light running thing, um you know, which I don't really think happens that much in 11.4 anymore. I mean, it feels like that's gotten relatively mature in terms of safety critical mistakes. And your comment, of course, we'll get to that in a minute about the comfort aspect. But in terms of safety critical mistakes, the 11.4 whatever has gotten pretty reasonably good, and it doesn't really have that many safety. I'm trying to actually remember right now the last one where I had to disengage, going like, oh, and I think there was one, it was like a month ago maybe, and there was a construction zone, and I was in the left lane, and you know, the barrels were coming up, and it was like you got to get over and the car didn't. But it was like a month ago, and that was the last time I can remember that I was like, oh, I had to take over because that was going to be a bad day otherwise. But normally when I take over, it's just a comfort thing, or I'm annoyed that it's kind of driving slower than me or something. So that's the
Yeah.
kind of thing. I don't know what your experience is. So what is your current experience with 11.4?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. It's I can't remember the last time where I had to take over because of a safety. So, okay, so I'll give you one example. So, on the road trip we took from Pennsylvania to Texas recently and back, so it was about
Right,
3,400 miles, and we used FSD beta for that, and the car did 99.9% of the miles.
right,
There was one situation on the highway where there was debris on the road, where a car in front of us avoided it, and the car was tracking on a line that probably wouldn't have hit that piece of debris, but I took over anyway because I didn't want to run the chance of my calculation being wrong, and
Right.
or the system wouldn't react to that piece of debris. So there, like I would consider that probably it probably didn't need to be taken over, but I took it over anyway because of safety.
Yeah.
So that was one situation in the last sort of month and a half ish. But
Right.
that's really the only one I can remember for the last few months where I was concerned that the system wasn't going to do the right thing.
Right.
When I take over now, it's very much that was stupid. You know, it's not like a, it's not like a, oh my god, I'm afraid. It's like, damn it, what an idiot. You know, it's
Right.
like just a guy on the road that's doing something really dumb, like uh, it's green and it's not going. That's not
Yeah.
safety
Yeah.
critical for me.
Right.
It's just an idiot. You know, with
Yeah.
all due respect to that person behind the steering wheel. You know, maybe they're distracted on their phone. So that's my relationship with full self-driving beta now. But those situations are few and far between, and the acceleration of the improvement is tough to really verbalize unless you've experienced the
Right.
software firsthand. And
Right.
so I do wonder how much of the like what percentage of the folks that do use full self-driving beta that are hesitant about the latest development are actually using the software, and where they land in that positive negative sort of outlook for what's about to happen. But that's my experience. That's my
Okay.
experience, and that's why
Okay.
I'm so it's very encouraging to see, like you said, what just happened. We just saw a system that uses AI, essentially end-to-end neural nets, to
Right.
be just as good than the current versions, and arguably better in the key areas that matter for adoption. But it's we won't be able to tell that for sure until we have it in our hands. But you know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, generally speaking, we've all, I believe, seen from like Omar and other people that it tends to drive the best in the Bay Area because that's where it's got the most
Mhm.
training and stuff. So, it's going to be showed off to its best capabilities there. And I don't have a problem with that. That's not an issue. But it is something where when we get this new version 12, everybody had better, like the people who are used to driving it had better like repay attention, because there's probably going to be new areas that it makes mistakes in that it didn't used to. Although Elon
Yeah.
he has said that he didn't expect it to be in beta by the time it comes to 12. I don't know if I'll believe that or not, but anyway, nonetheless, the impressiveness was, it'd be like, I don't know, it'd be like if an entire new phone operating system came out from Apple, even though it was still called the Apple iPhone or iOS. It was like all new. They're like, yeah, we rewrote it from the ground up and here it is. And it worked just as well as the old version, which is on version 14 or 15. There's got so
Yeah.
Tesla has done a lot of iterations of this thing. And yes, they've been slowly replacing the heuristic code with more and more neural networks, but still, this is a major rewrite. It's new software, and to see it behave that well was really remarkable. And the big thing I think for people to remember is it's like the Headroom thing. It's like every time like Elon would go, we're just about to solve it, it would level off and suddenly it would stop improving as quickly as he thought. And that means it was like not to the level of a human driver, and then to the level of a pretty bad human driver. And now I think we've gotten to the level of average human driver with where we are right now, where it still does dumb things sometimes, but it will get you from place to place if you're patient with it. And if the people behind you are patient with it, sometimes they
Yeah.
get frustrated too. Um, but this new one, the Headroom, should be really, really high. It should be way, way above the average human driver. Because one of the things that I found remarkable, and I don't know if you noted that, was the frame rate, how fast it's working. Elon was like, it's only limited by the camera frame rate now. The fact that you've
Mhm.
got the hardware, the computer boards in the cars are from like 2018, 2019. I mean, this is old tech in terms of this kind of world. It's several years old, and yet the system is operating at the maximum capacity of the camera frame rate, and it's just sitting around. In fact, I'm sure that's actually one of the reasons why I've seen Dirty Tesla, JKS, a bunch of other people post side-by-side pictures of hardware 3 in version 11.4.4 and 11.4.7, and they're like, look how much better it looks. It may well have to do with the fact that they have extra processing power hanging around right now. And they're like, yeah, let's
Mhm.
just post-process these images and make them look a little better for the user. Um, which I don't think was they may not have had that capacity before. They may have been really at the limits, and they're like, well, we're just going to show the people something when they look at the cameras. But now they look better, and it may well have to do with the fact that the computers aren't working as hard. And that's
Yeah.
remarkable too. That's really remarkable.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I think the thing that the 36 frame like little bit of information there, that's it's interesting that they're able to do that, like you said, with hardware that has been in the cars for as long as they have been.
Right.
And it sort of reinforces this point that I think people were very concerned about, that hardware 3 wouldn't be capable to achieve level 4 or level 5 with a some sort of solution that Tesla would put in the cars through software. And that was a concern of mine too.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really was. I'm like, oh crap, did I buy this car and now this thing's not going to be able to navigate on its own through roads and stuff? Do I have to make an upgrade now, or do I have to sell my car, or will this thing just be level 3 when actually hit level 4? And what kind of issues is Tesla going to run into from a litigation perspective,
Yeah.
getting, making sure they don't lose brand loyalty? Like actually, like that is a brand loyalty hit there. If like
Yes.
people were able
Yes.
to like bought hardware 3 cars, and all of a sudden they're like, you actually have to get a hardware 4 car and it's not retrofittable, I think Tesla has a legitimate problem on its hands there. But I mean, Elon has reiterated multiple times that through that, I think it started with the fourth quarter earnings, if I believe correctly. There was a thing where there was something he said that, hey, hardware 3 will be able to do this. We're very confident. We're very confident. And now, as we're approaching, the hopefully the release of FSD beta 12 sometime this year, that once we have it in our hands, we should know by then if that's actually correct or not, because we would expect this system to drive just as good as we do, as humans do,
Right.
in not just dry weather but also in rain and snow. And snow is
Yeah.
a big one that a lot of people don't talk about. But hardware 3, for it to be really robotaxi across all cities, it needs to be able to navigate snow. But if I think about how we navigate snow, yeah,
Right.
it's scary. Like I
Yeah.
hate driving in the snow and I hate driving on ice. But
Yeah.
we see snow and ice and we know how to drive through snow and ice. It's just the traction. The biggest limitation here is traction.
Right.
And the other one is understanding what the pathway is when you have a snow covered place, right? But
Right.
if
Right.
the AI, if you're feeding it images of 1,000 stoplight situations or 1,000 stop sign situations or 1,000 merge situations, and you're not really telling it what a stop sign, what a lane, what a road, what anything is, and the car just
Right.
figures out how to do that, then in theory it should be able to do the same exact thing with a snow covered road. It's just it will use whatever clues it needs to figure out how to move, how to make the right decision in that situation. Very similarly, and you tell me if I'm thinking about this incorrectly, but very similarly to how they taught things like Stockfish, the chess AI bot that is better than any human, no human's able to beat it. They didn't really teach you how to play chess by telling it what a rook is, what a knight is, what a pawn is. They just said, here's what chess looks like,
Right.
and now you figure out how to beat a human, right? But
Right.
now we're doing this with video in the real world,
Right.
and that is like I can't I the implications of that are so freaking crazy, John. I almost
Right.
cursed.
Right.
You
I
almost had to
know.
beat me.
Yeah.
Um, is that how you feel about this too,
Yeah.
or am I just like, tell me if I'm being
No.
over optimistic
The
here?
analogy, I think the analogy is valid, but it makes it seem easier than it is. Because a lot of people are
Mm,
like, oh, well, once the computer like figured out how to play itself in chess, or especially in Go, like DeepMind in their AlphaGo or AlphaZero, um, it was eventually able to just play itself over and over trillions of times. And now it's like so much better than humans that nobody even knows how it's playing anymore. They're like, I don't even know what that move. And this is from experts. I have no idea how to play Go, but experts are like, I don't even know how it's playing anymore. It's so good. The difference is for the real world, like Go in effect is really simple. There's what, maybe 10 rules or something. There's not that much to learn about the world. The world model that it has to build is all about how do the moves interact with each other, and the way that the board plays out. In the real world, it's not nearly that simple. It's much, much more complicated. And Tim Zaman, was that? I hope I got his last name right. Anyway, he's an infra guy. And he's one of the guys who was turning on the H100 cluster earlier this week. And he was like, we're basically the largest AI training cluster, like our data set is the biggest in the world by orders of magnitude. Because if you think about language, language is easy to compress. It's just words, and you can have a lot of words and you can store them on a
Mm.
hard drive. But all of this video data and stuff is hugely important and makes it much more complicated, but the basic idea is the same. You just let it go and train itself. Now, one thing I think is really worth pointing out, and this is a little bit to the fault of like Elon for not specifying this more, but maybe he thinks it's too complicated. It's not just watching videos. It's also got the stream of the inertial measurement unit, which is the little thing that tells it, is it moving sideways or forwards, or, all of that kind of
Okay.
stuff, and wheel traction and all of that kind of stuff. It's got that data too. So it's not like a movie that we would watch. It's like a movie we would, well, actually, you know what? The analogy would be like if you go to Disney World and you ride one of those rides where they show you the video, but you're at the same time you're going like up and down and you think you're on a
It's
roller coaster.
4D.
Yeah, the 4D. Yeah, those 4D. So it's getting more information streams, but that is really important because just like you were saying, I was thinking about this when you were talking about the snow example. You're going to get wheel traction, you're going to get IMU information along with the video. So it's going to see this white scene with like stuff falling. It doesn't know what that is, but it knows that in those circumstances, a good driver, which is exactly what Tesla's curating only the best driving, they're going to know a good driver slows way down, accelerates very slowly, decelerates very slowly. It's going to get that other input besides just the video. It's going to go like, oh, I see what's going on here. So what I want to do is accelerate real slowly when I see this kind of environment, that kind of a thing.
But the analogy to me sounds, again, tell me if I'm wrong here. You're the one
Right.
who understands this way better than I do. It's it sounds to me like it's like a human, right? Because we don't just use
Yes.
our eyes to
No,
move
no,
or to pick
exactly.
up things, right? We have like if okay, here's my phone, right?
Right.
So what did I didn't just use vision. I used vision. I used my tactile feedback. I used my positional awareness. I
Right.
used some my in ear to balance towards the phone a little bit closer and pick it up, and also my some balancing mechanisms going on for my muscles to ensure that the phone doesn't make me tilt over,
Right.
because the weight is a little bit off center. So
Right.
there's a lot going on, but and that point is very valid. I do wonder how much work, and this is where I've been struggling with this to figure out how to convey this to the public so that it reaches as many people as possible, because I really do feel inside of me that this is it. Like this is it. We don't have it
Right.
yet, but this is it.
Yeah.
But getting it so that it's understandable by many people without being misleading about what is happening in this space, because I don't see this being covered really anywhere else, and it's hard
Right.
to understand. I think it's hard to understand why this is such a big deal, because it's so complicated, because of what you just said. There's just
Yeah.
so much going on, and it's this new artificial intelligence area that we're falling into now, since the dawn of ChatGPT, where people are now like, oh my god, look at, now we have AI in our world.
Right.
I'm trying to take that, and I'm trying to build a bridge between what people conceptualize about ChatGPT and try to have folks understand what is happening in the real world space, because
Right.
ChatGPT is in the digital space and full self driving is real. It's in my opinion, it seems like the first real world application of artificial intelligence in the 3D space, like in how we interact with reality. And that in itself sets the stage for so much more in the future. That's where the humanoid robot comes in. That's
Right.
where, I don't know, freaking excavating equipment that doesn't need an operator and can just throw up buildings on their own. Like
Right.
this is kind of like the groundwork that that builds that, and
Right.
I don't know. And it's a challenge. It's a real challenge because, I want to catch myself before I go too far off the deep end. But
Right.
it sounds like the analogies are legitimate, that it's, there is a lot of different data sets going into an AI system or
Right.
whatever you want to call that thing. But it seems like the workload of actually solving self-driving is now on an artificial intelligence and not a room filled with coders to figure out how to build heuristics
Right.
that will actually allow the system to drive. Now we're telling an AI, so in the simplest of ways, which I know is not that simple, and there's a lot of complications in it. But literally, the thing is, tell me how to drive, and the AI is like, okay. And
Yeah.
then it drives.
Right.
That we're here now. It has
Yeah.
happened.
I mean, to give credit to all of the giants who came before this, obviously there have been many, many steps since the 1950s of working on AI and working on it in the real world too. I mean, all of that kind of stuff, robotics and all that. So I don't want to take anything away, but this is a step change in solving such a complex problem. Um, you know, you're moving from toy problems and things like that, and even early self-driving situations where, you know, back in the 90s, all the way back there in early 2000s, they would have these races across the desert and the cars would move like 2 miles an hour, and they were loaded with sensors and, like, you know, giant batteries. Even though they were gas powered cars, they had giant batteries because they had to run all the computers, and, you know, but they would do it. But it was a toy problem. It wasn't something that was a realistic, you're not going to drive down the road in that car. uh and all of those steps were necessary. Like, you don't get to skip those steps. And a lot of people are like, well, if the end-to-end thing works, why didn't Tesla do that? And Andre Karpathy just, in fact, the video that I just released right before we recorded this, he posted, sorry, not tweeted. He
How
posted
dare
just,
you, John?
well, I know, right? How dare I make a mistake? But he posted that Tesla has been working on end to end for a long time internally. So this wasn't something that's just like, oh my gosh, we never thought of this. Obviously, they thought of this, but there are many, many, many steps that you have to take to get to this end-to-end solution. If I'm interpreting what he said, because, you know, he's never one to dumb it down for the masses, but I think what he was saying is that the reward system is too sparse. If you start with an end-to-end network, in other words, just here are some pixels, here's my driving decision, and you just make one giant network, that if you start with just random weights in that network, that the reward system is too sparse. There are too many bits coming in for what you need to learn. And so the entire system basically can't converge ever. It can't figure it out. It's just like you're so far away from the solution. It'd be like if somebody told you right now, Farzad, you don't have access to a boat or a plane or a car, go climb Mount Everest. You'd be like, like, how am
Let
I
me
going to
ask you
do
a
that? How am I going
question
to get there?
there.
So yeah.
Is that limited by compute power?
To some extent, I suppose if you had some sort of super, like the Earth-sized computer or something like Douglas Adams had, maybe it would pop out an answer eventually and you get 42. But basically what they've done is they've cheated. They've gotten the weights pretty close to where they need to be by now with 11.4, and then you rewrite it and take out all of that extra code. That's all the human code. That's like, if you see a stop sign, do this. If you see this, then do this. If you see this, do this. All of that stuff, it's brittle. There's no way that's ever going to work, because heuristic code in the real world, it works great for chess, right? Chess is like, if you have a knight, the knight can only move to these spots after, in the next move. There's no way it can go anywhere else. It's very limited. If in the real world, there is never that limitation. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, stop at a stop sign unless there's this, and unless there's this, and unless there's, and the list of exceptions is longer than the rule itself. And so you just can't code that. It's too brittle. But what you have to do is get close. So you have to get the weights close. You have to get the neural network architecture close, and then you can turn it loose and it can fine tune itself and figure it out. So
I see.
that I think is the really, really big, like, takeaway from all this. And I know that seems
Got it.
really geeky and not important, but it's hugely important. And that means that all the
No,
data labeling, all the data collection flywheel, all that stuff is critical to this. It wasn't a waste of time at all. It was part of the steps you needed to take.
that's very helpful to understand, because one of the things that I've been thinking through is like, okay, so I wonder how much of the work they've done thus far was complementary to where they are now. And it very much, because Tesla doesn't really, as a company, never shies away from tackling anything, regardless of how difficult it is, if they
Right.
feel like that's the thing that needs to get done. And sometimes they'll get themselves, I have personal experience of this, having been there. It's like sometimes you end up going some very dark paths. Some like there's no light, and you're like, no, I still gotta, it's like literally what's that one movie with Morgan Freeman, with the guy that was unjustly jailed, and then he figured out how to get out of the jail. Oh my god. Oh my god. Why am I blanking on this
Are you
movie?
talking
Anyway, it'll
the
come.
Stephen King one, or
No,
oh,
no.
Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah,
Yes,
Shawshank
Shawshank.
Redemption.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
The guy for years just dug a
Right,
tunnel, and he
right,
just made it happen, right?
right.
And so I'm not doubting that Tesla will be able to get to that point if they just went head down, but it very much sounds like the work they did thus far allowed them to reach this
Right.
point where now they have something where, again, it's the onus is now on the compute power to get you to the solution. It's not on the team of engineers and coders at Tesla to
Right.
figure out how to arrive at the problem. And again, that from a fundamental perspective, it's a scale problem. It's not a breakthrough problem, it seems like, anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my analogy is always the dark forest with a moonless night, and that you're just like bumping into trees and stubbing your toes. I think that's exactly what you were saying. There's some dark
Yeah.
paths that you go down. And I'm not saying that every single move Tesla made was the right move, because until you actually get there, you don't know what the path is. You have to
Mhm.
actually traverse the forest, which means that, for, I don't know who's going to be able to produce the cars and come up with the compute power, but the second person to solve this problem, it's going to be way easier than Tesla, because they'll be like, oh, that's how you solve it. That's the general path that you go. So once you get there, it seems really obvious in retrospect. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a lot of wrong paths and things, but in general, the main thrust of it and all that, and the data flywheel and all that stuff, definitely complementary to this.
Can I ask you a
Yes.
question?
So question. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, on the labeling piece, right?
Yes.
So the labeling piece, and so when I say labeling for the audience, is the first you have to figure out what video to feed it, right? What video to feed the system to actually have it behave. You don't want to show it a bunch of video of cars crashing into each other.
Right.
Like that's the
Wait,
worst
no,
system you'll ever
GTA is
get,
not going
right?
to work as a
Yeah.
training example.
I wouldn't think so. Definitely not GTA 5, because that GTA 5 gets wild. But so they have to figure out, what kind of video they have to pick and choose first. So maybe I'll start there. Have you gained any insight based on what was said on Friday on if that's changed, or is that going to continue down the same path? And how does it work? Like, is it still sort of a combination of man and machine? Is it going to be mostly machine? How can you help me
Yeah,
understand that a little bit?
this has really caused a lot of consternation since Friday. Like, there are a lot of people on X who are just like, oh my God, the labeling, and is the labeling happening and stuff. From what I understand, what they've done is they've transitioned the labelers. And I'm not saying they're not doing any labeling, because I think they still use that as kind of a basic thing, but they're transitioning to some extent, or to a large extent, or to complete extent, to data curation rather than labeling. So the labeling step always was a huge bottleneck for Tesla, and they basically automated it away. They pretty much got it so the computer could label everything itself. But I think that, if you're doing an end-to-end model, it's really important to understand this is something that is learning how to drive. Imagine if you had been raised without access to language. I was, raised by wolves or something. So you're out there in the forest and you're like a kid. And then some evil mad scientist like brings you into the lab, but never talks to you. Nobody ever says a word to you. So you don't have language, but they stick you in a car and they drive you around, eventually without any access to language or knowledge of what a red light is or any of that stuff. You will eventually learn how to drive. Yeah, they'll give you the steering wheel and you'll be like, oh gosh, and you'll probably crash a few times, but you'll figure it out. And so that's the analogy. You've got this weird thing that doesn't have language. It doesn't know. So it's actually probably creating, just like I remember several years ago, Google Translate, the Google researchers were like, holy crap, it's created its own language internally. So if it needs to go from like English to Japanese, it first translates it into this Google translate language,
Oh,
its own latent space language that they don't know how to read it. And then it translates it to Japanese. Now, I don't know if that's still true. That was many years ago before transformers and stuff. But in my mind, it's the same kind of thing. The car has learned all of this stuff, but it doesn't have labels for that anymore. So back in the day, like right now, 11.4, the car has labels. It's like, oh, that's a car. Oh, that's a stop sign. Oh, that's a stoplight, right? It's got like a vector of all of these things. And my understanding of it, especially from the stop sign example that Ashok talked about, is that this thing has no language. It's created its own language. They were like, here's all of this stuff, take it all in. And it's like, okay. And so it's made up its own driving language thing, which they don't know how to interpret. They don't know. Elon and Ashok both said, we don't know how to interpret this. And that when you get to version 12, what you see on the screen is an estimation of what the thing's thinking. It's not what
mhm.
it's actually thinking. So we don't have
Wow.
direct access to its brain anymore, which is pretty wild.
Got it. So, and that's kind of like, I remember that from from the stream. So let me try to like
Yeah.
translate this in my brain to something that maybe I want to make sure I fully understand what you just said.
Yeah,
So when
absolutely.
you say that it has created its own language, what you mean by that is the way that it describes the world and what it sees, quote unquote, sees and
Right.
feels and navigates through, is in a self-created thing that it uses to make decisions, and then we can extract what that thing, that language is, but we have no idea what it's saying. So
Yep.
it's like when it looks at a stop sign, it doesn't see the word stop, which in English means you can no longer move forward.
Right.
It sees snake shaped thing, something that kind of looks like a T, but it's not,
Right.
a hole, and whatever, right? And then
Right.
it comes up with its own way of describing that, and then it spits it out to the team that says, and we don't even know that it said this is why it stops, but there
Right.
might be similarity that says, hey, this weird string of numbers and letters, I think is what's probably spitting out,
Yeah.
is stop sign. And so now Tesla has to sit down and be like, okay, this is stop sign. And so now
Yeah.
that, so that they can write the letters that say, okay, I'm stopping here because of a stop
Right.
sign. Is that, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's it.
Okay.
And it's even crazier than that because it doesn't have a
Oh,
concept of
geez.
thread, doesn't have a concept of snake, doesn't
Hmm.
have a concept of octagon, like all of those
It's
things.
however it interprets the
Yes,
world.
it's
Yeah.
figured that out. It's again, if you just took a human being and you said, and you just from birth, you're like, let them go. Would they create their own language? Would they start talking? Would a human being, this is a, please, nobody ever do this experiment. But if you did this experiment, would you see a human being actually develop their own language and just talk to themselves in some weird babble? Like, is that innate? But anyway, that's what this thing's doing. It's come up with some sort of language to understand the whole three-dimensional world. And we don't really have access to it. And so then I assume that the interpretation aspect of it is they're like, well, we see it spit out these numbers when it sees a stop sign. So we're going to like pull that out and we're going to visualize a stop sign
Oh.
here. So something weird like that, where it doesn't, with the thing that you see on the screen, like not just the fact of like, stopping at stop sign, but just the visualization of cars, the road. It doesn't know what a lane line is. It doesn't know any of that stuff. I mean, it does, but it just learned it on its own. It's not like anybody ever told it. It's crazy.
So Tesla literally has to make like a decoder pen. It has to
Yes,
make a decoder
yes,
pen
yes.
that that now the artificial intelligence, so that we know what the artificial intelligence is saying. We literally,
Yeah,
Tesla has created a new being that knows
yeah,
how to drive, and it uses its own language, and we have
right,
to create a translation, and Tesla has to create the translation. Okay, so
right.
can I take it a step further? I'm so sorry we're arrived to here already, but I just can't stop. I can't stop myself.
Cool. Let's do it, man.
Um, yeah. So does that then mean that when it comes to, say, the other solutions that Tesla is working on, as it pertains to them using their camera system and their hardware and their AI that they're using to solve for the real world, does that then mean that the same language will be used to solve for the humanoid robot? Is that a good way of thinking about it?
I would expect so. Yes. Because
Okay.
the basics of this language are interacting with the three-dimensional world. So I would expect that whatever it's come up with, that thing is a pretty reasonable representation of the 3D world. The Tesla bot obviously will have to have, like, if you think about it, like vocabulary wise, it's going to need new words. It's going to need like office chair, desk, computer, things that like the car doesn't see because it drives on a road. I guess unless there's an office desk sitting in the middle of the road, in which case it's like, well, there's an office, but it'll have to have new words for new things, but that's like a vocabulary thing. That's not a fundamental linguistic semantic thing.
So is it fair to say that this is sort of like a baby simulation of sorts of what reality is?
Oh, I don't think it's a baby simulation. It's a real deal simulation. Yeah. I
Straight
mean,
up.
in order to interact with the real world, it needs to know what the real world is. I can't remember if you have kids or not, but like, when you see little
No.
kids, they like, it's so annoying as a parent because they sit on their high chair and they drop crap off the high chair and they get super mad if you don't pick it up for them. And it's like 100 times, but that's the baby learning what gravity is. It's like, oh, I dropped. And the first time you give a kid like a helium balloon and they let go of it and it goes up, their minds go, they're just like, holy
Uh-huh.
mackerel, what is that? It went up, not down. So
Yeah.
like, no, that's them learning this stuff. And so the car's doing the same thing. It's watching TV and figuring it all out.
So
So
it's almost like, so Hans Nelson,
yeah,
he's been on
yeah,
my channel multiple
yeah,
times. He came up with this term. I don't know if he came up with it, but he said it first. I think he came up with it, but he's been thinking through this a lot himself. He called this thing meat space GPT. And meat space GPT is like this, like the way I conceptualize. I don't know if these are his exact words, but it's almost like it's a um it's like the most advanced Unreal Engine ever made. Like Unreal Engine,
right,
for people that are not familiar, it's this sort of a video game engine that makes games move very realistically. It sort of like tries its best to simulate the real world if from a physics standpoint. So when you get shot nobody gets shot in the shoulder, but if you get shot in the shoulder, your body reacts properly based on the weight of the bullet, whatever, or you step
right.
on a rock, you're whatever. So it seems like by solving by using the method that Tesla used to solve for self-driving, they've also created a system or something that is the most accurate representation of the physical world. And so in theory, this system or thing can be used to solve not just for self-driving, but really anything in the physical world if you scale it up big enough and you take it into the future long enough.
Right.
Is that a fair way of characterizing what the future of this could be?
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I
Okay.
don't think we're talking about far future here. I think that I'm sure in parallel they're running we need a new term because it's not full self-driving, but full self-optimist version 12. I'm sure that they have a parallel version of that working on the robot too. And it's learning a different vocabulary, but it's probably very similar uh like
It's like
linguistic.
Latin,
Pardon me?
right? It's like Latin. So like the thing
Yes.
is
Yes.
Latin and the car uses English and the or whatever, German. It's like they have similarities, but
Right.
each system uses like
Oh,
a
no, I
similar
think it's
thing.
even closer than that. I think
Okay.
they're both speaking in Latin, but one of them has a vocabulary that's like this, and the other one has a vocabulary that's like this. And so
Like
they
one of them
have different
slang.
yeah, well, they have different words because again, the Optimus
Oh,
has to interact with objects that are really different. And of course, it has a much more
I
complicated
see.
output. Yeah. But so it's like
The
the same
car's never going
language.
to face chairs, what you're saying. Like you're not going to have
Exactly.
chair in the, well, hopefully.
Actually, in all honesty, it probably
You
will
might.
because every once in a while you're driving down the highway and there's a chair in the road.
Yeah,
So
there's shit
yeah.
falling off pickup trucks all the time here in Texas. So we'll probably see chair. Okay, sorry, continue. My
But
my
no, but I
apologies.
mean, I think that's what it is. It's a vocabulary issue, not a basic language issue, if you want to put it that way. Now, one thing that's
Okay.
really interesting, and this is something that Ashok and especially Elon have kind of teased a few times, is that they're working Tesla, not XAI, is working on a large language model, and that I have a suspicion that they are trying to. Now, there's two options. Number one, you take your end-to-end network with that we don't understand, and you plug a large language model on top of it so that you can say to the car, like, boy, I'm really hungry tonight. And it goes like, what do you want to eat? And you're like, oh, I'm in the mood for Mexican. And it's like, well, here's three really good choices that Yelp likes a lot. And,
Mm.
just a natural language, but that's like fluff on top of the basic system. The other option, which is way more intriguing, is inlining the large language model. So actually having that be part of the full self-driving stack, which would mean that at any point you could pull out what it's thinking. Because then what you're doing is you're integrating an English slash whatever language, a human readable language into the
Uh,
mix, which would make it much less of a black box. You'd be able to go in and ask it what it's doing and say, it'd be like, oh, I'm thinking this right now. So that to me is really intriguing. I have no idea if they're actually doing that, but they have definitely hinted that they're working on a large language model right now.
so it's almost like you embed the translation layer into the thing that's processing the real world, which it's using to make decisions.
Right.
So in a way that we can understand for
Right.
every time it has it. I hate this word is like insane to say out loud, but anytime it has a thought,
Yes.
it will think in English. or in
Yeah, or
whatever
at least be able to
language.
translate it for us. So it might be like
Okay,
English as
okay.
a second language. It's used to speaking
I don't
like
like this conversation right now, John. This is scary.
the car's gonna have to dumb it down for us. Basically, that's what's gonna happen. It's gonna be like, I have so many thoughts, and these humans are slow. Let me just turn it into some really bad language. Because the one thing is that probably whatever language it has that describes this 3D world is probably really, really efficient. The fact that it's able to run so quickly and it's able to run on 100 watts, which is pretty remarkable. It means that it's got a very efficient description of the world. Its world model is super compact. And by the by, this is super geeky, but I did a video 2 years ago now. I had to go back and dig around and find it. But it was on Tesla. They published a paper about inventing a new numbering system. And that, I think, has been critical to their ability to run as fast as they can. It's called configurable floating point, or CFP8. And I'll try to remember to put a copy of it up here. But anyway, definitely watch it, because Elon has specified several times that they run on 8 bits, and that's one of the ways that they're able to operate the cars at such high speed, because every time you double the size of your numbers from 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, it's a lot more memory bandwidth. It's a lot slower to process it, and somehow they've managed to squish everything down on the computer that's in your car, not the training computers, down to 8-bit floating point with a variable mantissa, which is really geeky. But basically, it adjusts its scale. It has like an exponent and digits after the dot, right? So it's like a number might be 8 point, or let's take pi, 3.1415 or something, right? So you've got the number, you've got your integer number, and then you've got a decimal point or a comma for everybody else in the world, and then you've got the numbers after that. Well, this configurable floating point number, what it does is it adjusts the caret, the 10 to the power of, to make that number. What the problem with a low resolution number is, what instead of 3.14, what if you had 0.0000000314, right? That number on an 8-bit is going to just be 0, and that's no good. But what they've done is they've created this thing where they can variably adjust dynamically what that floating point, like raised to the power of, basically is. So they can adjust it so that it's always 3.14, and it just kind of has this thing that's like, oh yeah, and there's a bunch of zeros in front of it too. So it's like 10 to the -6th or something like that, or it'd be binary, but anyway. So it's very, very interesting how they did this numbering thing, and that seems super esoteric, but it's really important. I don't know if you've heard. So you've heard. So just real quick, like ChatGPT, right? No, Llama.
Of
Sorry,
course.
Llama, because that's open source.
Yeah.
There are people running Llama on not only like a phone, but even on a Raspberry Pi. Like
Yeah, I
those
heard
little
that.
stupid. Yeah. So the reason they can do that is what's called quantizing, which is exactly what I'm talking about here. You just crush the resolution of these numbers from 64-bit down to 8. But in order to do that effectively, you have to have this variable floating point mantissa thing. So anyway, it's
Okay.
really fascinating, but super geeky. Sorry, folks.
No, it's good, because I think I'm trying to wrap my head around how this happens. So let me try to figure out what you said in a way that I like it will
Okay.
stick in my brain. So unless they had that thing, they would have had I don't know what to call this, but a data set or something that would be really, really large and very it would take a lot of time to process, because there's so many numbers they have to go through.
Right.
But once they implemented this, I don't know, converter, whatever you want to call it, this thing, now both the size of well, I guess, how many numbers it has to go through. So help me understand why this is important, maybe, like where
Yeah.
in
Okay.
the
Okay. So let's start with we'll keep this all in base 10, even though everything.
Professor Gibbs.
Yeah. But no, okay. So all of this, just understand.
Send me an invoice.
All of, you're on my show. I don't need voices here. You should send me one. But anyway, so just remember, this is all actually in binary, but I'm going to do base 10 because I can't just do binary in my head. But so again, we take a number like pi, 3.1415926, whatever it is. If you want to do that in 64-bit base 10, you have 3 and then 63 numbers after that. That's a big number. And every time the computer wants to calculate with it, it has to read that number in, calculate on it, spit whatever the result out is, and then, move on. And if you do that, like all a tensor is, all that a neural network is 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 like billions of these. When they talk about, ChatGPT is 174 billion parameters, that's all it is. It's 174 billion numbers that are really, really, really big numbers. And so if you have to do this, if you have to do this to 174 billion things multiple times a second, it's going to eat it. It's just not going to be, you're gonna have to have a whole data center.
I see.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're taking that number and you're going whoop, and you're squishing it down to 8. So 3.1415926. I think it's about exactly how much I remember. So now that's a lot faster to pull in. It takes a lot less memory to store, faster to pull in, faster to calculate on. Not good for training because you need the resolution when you're training. You need big numbers so that the tiny little adjustments are kept track of. You want that resolution. But in inference, which is the part your car's doing, all you care about is getting a result that's close. So even though this number is not exactly right because it's missing all of that other stuff, it's close enough to do the job it needs to do. And it takes for, let's see, 1632. So it's like 4x less, numbers than a 64-bit number, and it can read. It takes 4 times less storage space, 4 times faster to load, 4 times faster to do the calculations on. Everything is so much faster. So yeah.
Got it. And that close enough is 10 times better than a human once this thing is once they have all the data points they need.
Assuming that they are correct. Yes.
Assuming
I mean, we don't know that answer for sure until we get there, but it should be adequate. If they have to go to 16 point a bit, that would be a big hit on their part. But generally speaking, these numbers with that much resolution, 8-bit resolution. Now it is binary, so that effectively you're looking at maybe like 3 or 4 digital base 10. So it might be 3.14, but for the purposes of what, I don't know how much you use pi in your calculations in daily life, but when you do,
rarely now.
Yeah, I know. When you do, for the most part, 3.14 is a perfectly adequate substitution for like having this yeah. I mean, you can go and you can tell Python to like generate pi to the 150th digit, and you can use that for all your calculations, but why? There's no purpose to it unless you really need that incredible resolution. And for driving, we're talking about like a couple of centimeter accuracy here. It's not, you're not talking about nanometers. And so, it's adequate. It's adequate what it needs to do.
That's super helpful. So what that basically means is that to get it to a point where they're just limited by frame rate, that 36 frames per second, they've figured out how to implement a converter type thing that would allow them to process all the data that would be generated by the system, in whatever step, to be processed in a way so that they're only limited by how quickly the feed comes in and not the computer calculating what is happening. Exactly. Is that a fair way? Okay.
Yeah. And that's why it's beautiful. 36. So, but just remember, like when they're doing the training, all of the stuff that they're doing in their $2 or $3 billion data centers, all these very expensive things, they're using high resolution numbers. And they want to keep all
in
of
the training
as they do the training. But when they squish it down for the thing that they send to your car, like the software update, that's just they just mash it down. Yeah.
And so let me ask you another question there. So because the training has so much resolution, if in theory, God forbid this happens, or who cares if this, I don't even know what the answer is here, but if they're in a situation where they need to go to, say, I don't know, 100 frames on the cameras for whatever reason.
Right.
And they need to, and then at that point, then and then for how deep the numbers go in the car, like when it spits out a number, instead of it being 8-bit, and this to be 16-bit. In theory, Tesla could do that because they have in the training data set, they have all the resolution down to the freaking whatever number they may need in the future. So it doesn't become a thing of, oh my God, we don't have enough data that we've collected. It becomes in a thing where they have to say, okay, oops, we thought we could get away with 8-bit. We actually have to go to 16-bit, and we have to go to 100 frames, but it's okay. We have all the data we need. It's going to be a kind of a bitch to get there, but we have what we need. We have what we need, right? Okay, is that fair? And it becomes a hardware problem.
Yes, and clearly, Hardware 3 has hardware 3 cameras, which are 36 frames per second. So they never need to go faster than that with hardware 3. But in some, hypothetical hardware 5 world with 100 frame per second cameras, yes, they could just go to 16-bit, because all they do is when they crush it down from whatever its native, I don't know if it's 128 or 64-bit, but when they quantize it, when they squish it down, they just go to 16 instead of 8. And so super easy.
Got it.
Like,
Got
so
it.
no
Okay.
problem at all. So one thing I think a good analogy here is if you've done any photography and you take like a raw photograph and you look at the size of that photograph, that's got all the details, every single
Yeah.
pixel, and it might be like 12 megabytes or something, right? It's really big. But then
250.
250, I mean, it could be that, yeah. But I'm just saying, so it depends on the size of your camera. But just let's just say 10, could be 100, whatever. But if it's 10 megabytes for that raw photo, you can do a JPEG compression of that, which is, to our eyes, unless you zoom in, indistinguishable. And you can probably get away with maybe a couple hundred K, maybe 500 kilobytes, something like that. So there's these orders of magnitude less, because what you're doing is you're quantizing that data. You
Got it.
don't actually need, now, if you're going to go into Photoshop and you're going to like do really cool stuff with it, yeah, you want that raw photograph, because you want every little teeny bit of detail as you're messing with it. And that's the equivalent of the training. But when you output it, which is the equivalent of the inference, it's just like JPEG compression. It's just like,
I see.
yeah, it's lossy. Yeah, it's not exact. If you zoom really far in, you can see it. Like, you'll see that there's like chunky, you'll get way in there, it'll be chunky, and the outlines will be a little bit jagged, but it works just fine in the real world. I mean, the whole, the universe of the internet, like JPEG images are everywhere on websites and stuff, and people do not complain about that. They're not like, ew, JPEG. So
Gotcha. That helps. Actually, that's a tremendous help. Thank you.
yeah.
What this really highlights for me is that um oftentimes we hear the sentence, if I bring it back to like the Tesla topic for a little bit here, the the sentence gets thrown around: Tesla is not just a car company, right? Tesla is not just a car company. And so this discussion here, I am not an expert in this. I understand the broader implications from a business perspective. I understand the concepts in a broad perspective. But when I sit down and I talk to somebody like you who understands the minutia and the technology, what goes through my mind is like, okay, so the company literally had to hire people to sit down and solve for this in their building, to figure out how to make this happen. And this is only a very small sort of variable that they have to solve for when it comes to doing this version 12 thing, right? There's this thing, then they have to figure out like the dojo thing is, I don't even want to think about the amount of effort that it takes there to build their own chip.
Well,
And
let's
to,
forget about building your own chip. Just
oh
getting the
boy.
H100s or A100 NVIDIA things. The making a data center is not trivial. They were talking about that. It's not just, you don't buy 10,000 of these chips and flick a light switch and they just come on. It's months of work and all of this interconnect, and it's a huge task. And that's not even Dojo, which they designed themselves. So yes, all of this stuff, it's massive investments. And we can dial it back to the mid 20 teens when Tesla was like, yeah, let's go ahead and bet on the future and put all of these sensors and computer boards in cars, which is useless right now. What car company would do that? What car company? It's crazy. It was totally nuts. So, I mean, thank goodness they did, but it's
so
nuts.
crazy. That's so crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like going through this discussion now is like the amount of foresight and the decision making, because I'm guessing it went something like Elon going to the team and being like, hey, we have to figure out how to build this into the car. Oh, by the way, we need to figure out how to make sure that this is a profitable car with, I don't know, $2,000 worth of equipment. I think that's what Corey and those guys estimated in Monroe.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
$2,000 worth of equipment, which we're not going to use properly until like maybe next year. And then it turns out to be 2023, 2024, right? So that's sort of,
and let's not forget, this was all happening not with today's Tesla, which is flush with cash. This is happening in 2018 Tesla, which is about to go out of business because they can't ramp the Model 3 fast enough. And it's like, well, what if we strip out this $2,000 worth of stuff so the car's cheaper as we're building these first versions? And he's like, nope. I mean, that's ballsy. That is really ballsy.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like, I don't see how, and this is where when I think about like why this is such a big deal in relation to every other car company, I don't think there is any way on planet Earth that a car company makes that decision. 0% chance.
No.
There's no way. That what they'll say is, I mean, we see it come to fruition before our own eyes. And again, I could be wrong. This is just me thinking out loud
Well,
and
let's just
having a
pause on that
conversation.
for a
Go
moment.
ahead.
We
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
have to assume that no other car company would do it. What other car company has done it? Aside from
Nobody.
some
Yeah.
Chinese car companies that are doing it right now, and Lucid, there's the startups, the ones who are new to the game, but these older companies, they're not putting this stuff in there.
But I mean, they're not just not putting the stuff in there, but they're not. How many of these car companies have a server or whatever, a room full of 10,000 H100 chips, and they're
Right.
bringing up their own chip system to process this data, and they
Right.
have a mechanism to capture the real world around them and vision. I guess a lot of these companies would do the vision part because they need that data to marry it up with the lidar and the
Yeah, but what
sonar and
they'll
the
do is they'll partner
ultrasonics.
with Mobileye or somebody else who will do
Exactly,
it
it's
for
third
them.
party.
Yeah, they do it third
Yeah,
party, and then they don't have control of it.
yeah,
I'm going to touch on this. This
yeah,
is something that really I don't think anybody else has noticed at this point, but I think that Tesla's insurance was generated by the fact that they knew they were going to need to curate good data, and that the first thing that
yeah,
happened was that they were like, how do we grade drivers? And they looked around at the
yeah.
data and they're like, oh, here we go. And they came up with a simple scoring system, but basically they figured out, how do we know who a good driver is so that we can curate that data? And then they're like, but wait, now that we know this, we could have
Yeah.
insurance and we can insure people based on this thing. And we can also allow people to get full self-driving beta based on it. So in my mind at this point, I'm like, I think that's what came first. I think the chicken and egg thing was that they came up with a grading system to curate the good data, because they don't want a crappy driver. They said that very specifically in the live stream. And I've heard this with ChatGPT too, and other companies. They're like, oh gosh, if you spend the time to curate the data and only teach it, I think about the analogy would be like, if you're going to like sixth grade and you're learning some basic algebra, and the teacher like 50% of the time gives you the wrong answer, like you're going to have a really, really hard time. I mean, I'm sure it was hard enough learning how to do it with the right
I had a
answers.
teacher like that.
Yeah. Well, I feel
Yeah,
bad for
let's
you.
not talk about that. Yeah,
But
let's not talk
but
about
how
that.
hard would that
Yeah.
be? So you want only the highest quality, best data. And if you get that, then you could, but how do you get that? You have to come up with a system to figure out what the best quality data is. And once you've got that, you've got like, well, insurance is a no-brainer at that point. So
So I think it's fascinating you bring that up, because that's exactly what was going through my head, because I was seeing those questions show up on X for my posts. Is like, yeah, but how are they going to find, like you said, how are they going to
right,
curate the data? How are they going to label the data? And that's they can tell you who a good driver is. To your point, they can
right,
say, okay, you have a 99 safety rating, you have a 100 safety rating, and they have the six different things or
right.
five different things that they measure you by to deduce if you're a good driver. But that's not the only thing they have. They have that
Oh yeah.
entire resolution thing you're talking about, right? Like all those numbers that go to the, I don't know, a 64th or 128th digit or whatever it
Right.
is.
Right.
Those are the data points that describe how a person is driving their car in the real world.
Right.
And when you this is where the human comes in. And well, I guess the human now, maybe in the future not a human, but right now the human says, like you said, the close enough thing you're talking about, then they're like, okay, these are the numbers that we know mean good driver, because we're
Right.
basing our insurance on it. And if we don't have the right numbers, then we're the worst insurance company in the world, right?
Yeah.
So they have the, it's crazy. And so it's like what I think, what comes up to mind when I think about this is how GPS was invented, right? It
Right.
wasn't GPS one of those things, or the internet, like these giant breakthroughs, or penicillin, right? Like
Yeah.
these inventions that completely transformed the world, where they're like, oh, I was meant to do this, but oh, look at this thing that's going to be
Yeah.
incredibly
Exactly.
helpful for humanity that I didn't
Right.
even know was here, right?
Well, and
So
you know, part of the genius of Tesla as a company, and I more than Elon's other companies because they're not as public, but part of the genius of it is that he's figured out a way to. There's one business model which would be like, please give me more venture capital, please give me more venture capital. Eventually, I'll make a profit, I promise. He's like, let's do this for the future, but also make money right now, so that we're not just like
yeah.
dumping all of these resources into something that doesn't earn anything. Even full self-driving right now, it like, it's probably less than break even because of how much money they're spending on the data centers and the employees and all that stuff. But it still generates a reasonably healthy amount of money every year, $15,000 and there's, or $200 a month or whatever. And a lot of people subscribe to it. And so, you know, he's figured out a way to monetize the future, which is really, really cool.
That's such a good point. I mean, the way I think about that is they are. I have a hard time finding another public company, at least, that's as efficient about capex as Tesla is, right? Because that's really what it is. It's like you're taking. I think Tesla's capex is 60% less than Facebook's. Last time I looked at,
Oh
or
my
their
gosh,
sorry, their
is
R and
that
D, their
true?
R and D, something like
Oh my
that.
gosh, that's
Yeah, I think
crazy.
their R and D is a fraction of Meta's, and Meta is a software company, and they make goggles, you know. But Tesla is able to spend. I think it's R and D. Somebody correct me in the comments,
Okay.
but the amount of money they put towards technologies and investments in their existing products and factories and processes, uh, the amount of money they spend now for the future is not only just a fraction of it, a fraction of what a typical company would spend, but then the fruits of that investment are so giant in the long term, you
Right.
know? And then, like, to your point, they're doing it in parallel with the rest of the business, and they're still making money in an industry that no one else is making money in.
Right.
It's like these like weird, like you just keep stacking these unlikely scenarios on top of each other, and then you sit down and you think about it for a second. You're like, okay, no wonder something like Tesla Q exists, or no
Yes.
wonder why people out there are doubting everything that's being said, because it's freaking crazy.
Yeah.
Like, this is insanity. Of course, people are doubtful and are like, how the hell is this possible? Because it kind of isn't.
Yeah. It
It
really
kind
isn't.
of isn't.
I think
Yeah.
I think you basically just answered your own question. Is Tesla a car company? It's like it can't be.
We figured it out. It's a
Yeah,
fraud,
it's
John.
a
Finally, we figured it out.
it is a series of unlikely events, though. It's crazy. Uh,
It's wild.
yeah, it's, and I think you know, part of that comes from the fact that Tesla was so close to death so many times. It comes from Elon, you know, clearly at the helm and the guy who provides the vision. But I think part of that impetus, that leanness, that like we have to make it work with the minimum amount of input, money, time, et cetera. You know, that all comes from that sort of uh well, now I'm thinking about like my grandparents, like the people who lived through the Depression in the US and elsewhere, that they had a mentality that was like, no, frugal, frugal, frugal. Do not spend extra money. Don't go out to
Yeah.
eat. You know, but that same sort of thing, it's like, how much can we get from the absolute minimum amount of input that we have? And right now, Tesla could easily be, what is it, about 120,000 employees, which is big, huge. But if it was like a software company, it'd probably have a 500,000 employees right now. Easily it could be 3 or 4 or 5 times bigger than it is, because there could be a bunch of people who are, you know, drinking lattes every day as their primary job. So,
Yeah.
which would be a great job,
That's
by the way.
true.
I'll take that. So,
Yeah. I mean, getting paid to drink lattes is great. That's why I'm so excited for that biography to come out from Walter, because
yes,
you
yes,
I think there is very much a link between sort of the existential crises that Elon has had in his personal life and what
right,
he's faced trying to build stuff that's very much alive in the culture of a company like Tesla,
yeah,
which has allowed it to constantly face the put itself in impossible situations over and over again. It's like a
right,
physical manifestation of the human spirit of Elon Musk, if you want to say it that way.
yeah,
I think there's a little bit of a correlation there that helps explain why it's such a weird phenomena. Like, you know, it's such a unique thing. And of course, you and I say this really, I shouldn't be putting words in your mouth, but I'm saying this as somebody that it's a huge fan of the company. I know you are as well, but
right,
it's there it seems like there's something. It's more than just a bunch of really smart people working together. It's there. It goes deeper. There's something else brewing that I think is very much enabled because of the kind of person Elon is, which is a fascinating thing because it comes with a giant amount of strengths, but it also comes with weaknesses that we've seen. You
yeah,
know, that they're very public, and that's okay because that's what a human is. But like, it's funny how those all that thing comes together in a physical manifestation, and that happens to be this really weird company that we're talking about right now.
Right.
And I think about that a lot. I think about that a lot. It's like,
So,
why is it so unique?
let
You
me
know?
turn that back on you, because you
Yeah,
worked there, and it's not like you were, in Elon Musk's office every day or something. So did you feel
I
that
was.
culturally? Oh, you were. Awesome.
No.
Oh, no. I was like, you didn't work in the same state as him, man. So, but I mean, but did you feel that culturally? Did you notice that drive or mission centered idea, or
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, 100%. I've talked about this before pretty often, but it's one of those things where so many people, I'm not going to say 100% of the people because there was still turnover. You're still going to hire folks that are not really fully bought into the culture, but uh, everybody was there for the mission. When I say everybody, I mean most people. Most people are there for the mission. There are some people that are there for the career, that are there for the accolades, they're there for the money. And
right?
I'm not going to say that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what it is. Uh,
Yeah,
but but what was very unique about that experience was that people were willing to go above and beyond because they wanted the company to succeed really, really badly. Because what the culture that Elon set was inspiring people to do, which is advance the world to a sustainable future.
right, right,
And um, if I draw it back to like the people that I work with directly, so my buddy Greg, who used to be my boss, who hired me, we're pretty good friends now. But if I think about him, he was able to do so many insanely difficult things, and he was able to make so many insanely difficult decisions, and he had so much freedom to set a culture for that building that we were in
right,
because of how Tesla's culture was as a company, which was to give the keys to the individual and trust them with the keys to the company,
right,
and being like, hey, I know you're going to work your ass off to make sure this company is successful. Do what you think is best to get us there because we trust you. We hired you for a reason.
right.
And somebody like a Greg, who I just admire, respect so much, was like was that representation. I was able to have somebody that I work with extremely closely that sort of encapsulated and he took advantage of the quote unquote power that was given to him, and that
Right.
is intoxicating because you're seeing
Yeah.
somebody that's Greg G. I'm not going to say his full last name because I don't want to I don't want to say who he is exactly. I
Hi,
don't even
Greg.
know if he wants. Hi, Greg. If you're watching this, which you might, but he was a very inspirational person for me because I was able to go into a random building for Tesla that's not in California, and then I'm able to see this culture led by this person that I'm like looking at him, and I'm like looking at Elon and interviews and stuff, and I'm like, this is like the same guy. Like these guys are, I can tell that they're working incredibly hard, but they're doing it in their own way. And
Right.
that was what was so beautiful about working there, is that everybody manifested that culture in the best way they knew how. And I saw this not just in my organization, but across many different organizations. And seeing that, and then those people giving you the keys as well. So it's like you have this mechanism where Tesla keeps passing down the keys to the business to people that are quote unquote very low in the hierarchical structure, even though Tesla doesn't really
Right.
operate in that manner. But you would have people like material handlers or people like warehouse workers that are coming up with processes and ways to implement certain things for the distribution network that gets implemented across the entire network,
Wow.
like just this, yeah, in a matter of days, bro. And like
Right.
that's the thing that was completely mind-blowing to me. It's like, okay, we come up with something in Bethlehem that a material handler came up with, which is obviously the right solution, and then by the end of the week it's everywhere. I'm like, okay, that's crazy. Excuse me.
I may have to bleep. I don't
Sorry.
know. YouTube is supposed to be good about that. On X, I definitely don't have to bleep it. So
Yeah.
anyway, but yeah, no, it's absolutely nuts when you think about how that works. And I know this people may get frustrated with this analogy, but I have done a lot of film and live theater productions, and there's a feeling of that too when you have that mission of like, we're putting on this play, this piece of art that's great. People work a lot of hours they're not sitting there clocking in and clocking out. Now, yeah, I know in a lot of big budget movies that's exactly how they do it, but consider the passion project ones. And that's the difference between Legacy Auto and and Tesla. But you
Yes.
have people who are really devoted to that. The actors, the designers, the whoever are all empowered to do their own thing. They have a lot of responsibility on themselves, but they're all collectively like, we have to open this play on September 15th or something, right? And that's the day it's going to happen, and we all have to get behind it and push. And if it takes extra hours, and that's great. But it's sort of the way, at least the way I think about it, because I've spent a lot of time in theaters and everything working on that kind of stuff. But you
Yeah.
know, obviously much bigger, more profound implications with something like Tesla, but the same sort of feel. It's like really everybody get behind, everybody is empowered to do your own thing. I think that's just, if I was just like a person who was working on the floor and I was like, oh, this would be a great idea, what other company would even entertain hearing that idea, much less be like, oh yeah, we'll implement this next week across the whole like warehouse fleet.
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell? That doesn't happen.
Yeah. It's very
So,
unique. It's very,
yeah.
very unique. And it's rooted in trust. It's
Yep.
rooted in trust. And
Yep.
that's, if, you know, if actually, when is my 2 year? So I think in 2 weeks, it's my 2 year anniversary since I left. My 2 years
Right.
since I left Tesla. But if I think back to what is like my biggest takeaway after reflection is trust.
Yeah.
It's so big. And it's not just like a worker thing. It's like trust across people is such a huge thing. You know, you
Yes.
think about our current climate politically and media. It's like the reason why there's so much upheaval is because there's a lack of trust. And that's one thing that Tesla did so well, was to place trust in people that deserved it,
Yeah. Okay.
and that's what,
So
that was very unique.
I think that I'm getting the sense that that's happening in X too, that there's employees there. There's not that many anymore,
Yeah,
but the ones that are there have a huge amount of empowerment. But let me ask you this, because you brought it up, and maybe we can sort of wrap this back up again with X again, because I've had
yeah.
you on here for a long time. But do you think it's possible to get a big chunk of humanity to push along with that mission? In other words, not the employees of X, but the users of X, the people who are like, because it seems like that's what Elon wants. Is he's saying like, I want to have this free speech platform where that is primary, and I want humanity to be better because of this. And in a sense, you get that same thing
Mm,
as other companies too. But yeah, but there, you know, at another company, there's a very careful screening process. My understanding is that the hiring process is intense at Tesla and probably SpaceX and these other places
this.
too. But so you don't have that with people who are using X, because obviously anybody can do it, can you know, join, you can sign up. But do you feel like it's a potential, like, is it a possibility that this location, this app could become the thing that actually helps humanity in general better itself? Or is that just impossible with that many people?
That is a fascinating connection, because I think that's kind of what's happening from a, like, if I were to say how has Elon and the leadership teams that his companies figure out how to implement a culture where people want to be their best selves and
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
reach a point where they're fulfilling their, they're just as content and as happy as they can be through hard work and a meritocracy, right?
Right.
um that culture very much exists for the user base in X, in a way where it's kind of like, okay, freedom of speech is the it's no, like, I view the analogy there is very similar to the culture at Tesla, where we Elon's not a god or a president or nothing, but he's
Yeah.
created a scenario where it's like, okay, freedom of speech means that I trust you. Like,
Yeah.
hey, here you go. Like, if you think about what is not freedom of speech, so what is like a content moderation or a demonetization tool from another media site? It's
Right.
a thing that says, I don't trust that you're doing the
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
based on my rules, right? Like, I am putting an additional layer on top of the law because I don't trust you. That's literally what demonetization and content moderation is, and yanking content. That's what
Right.
that is. And so in X, it's like, okay, gates are open. Here you go. We trust you, right? Here, there's still rules like, hey, you can't copy people's work. You can't hire people to freaking monetize, like click like. You
Yeah.
can't pay people to click likes for you, right? There are still
Right.
very basic rules that still have to be followed, but the amount of um, the amount of layers of bureaucracy that are analogous to, say, a corporation, where it prevents you from getting promoted or getting recognized or being noticed or being listened to, those are yanked out as much as possible from the user base at X.
Right.
And then the monetization variable is, okay, here's the carrot, here's the incentive
Right.
for you to feel empowered. Is like,
Right.
hey, the more you do this, the more money you make, the
Right.
more the system rewards you for putting stuff out there for other people to see.
Right.
Now, one could say that once you get ad folks involved, you create a scenario where, you know, if the ad people don't really like what you say, then they choose not to monetize what you're saying, which creates a weird sort of scenario there, which I think needs to be talked about.
Right.
But at the very least, once X reaches its sort of goal of becoming a platform where they're not just a media company, but they're also a financial services company, which means that they have a diversification of income streams, which means that they're less reliant on ad folks for profit, which means that they don't really have them by the, you know what, then in theory, you've removed a lot of the negative, like the disincentives that would be on a creator or a person to hold their tongue or to say things or to only say things that certain people might find appropriate, right?
Right.
So I think there is, and I'm just thinking out loud because what you said really resonates with me, because if I think about like creating on X, some of the vibes I get are similar from working at Tesla.
Okay.
I do, because I'm surrounded by I really think X has the biggest collection of smartest people out of any social media platform, where the voices are at the forefront. You know, even if I disagree with them 100% of the time, I can still tell these are well-meaning, intelligent people.
Yeah.
And I see that on X a lot, whereas the other media platforms are much more geared towards entertainment and sort of like pleasing the algorithm, you know, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a different vibe. It's a different vibe. It feels a little bit more, it speaks deeper to me from a perspective of keeping me engaged and making me feel like I'm part of something that's bigger than what I'm just working on. It's like we're part of like a group of people that are working towards something. So I don't know if it's going to make society better, but I will tell you that the mechanisms and incentive structure that Elon has put in place with X, to me, feel correct. And it just has to run its natural course, because if you lay out the proper foundation and the proper incentives, all you really need is time. It's like no different than, again, the analogy is there. It's no different than making the Model 3 and all you need is time to scale up. It's no different than building the AI thing that teaches a car how to drive, and all you need is time plus compute power, which is twice the time because you have to buy them and they have to come in to ramp up those things. And with X, it's the same thing. You've put in the base layer stuff in place. You've cut down the staff by 80%. So you only have the people that you need to have the proper culture set in place. And then you start ramping, you start ramping the feature set, you start ramping the incentives for people to create. And then over time, as more and more people see the value and are rewarded from that system, then it should be a flywheel, some sort of feedback mechanism that will make that system stronger and stronger and stronger to the point where it just becomes the largest in the world.
Yeah. I totally agree with
Sorry,
you.
that was
I think
a
those
ramble.
are those are
My
great
bad.
insights. I'm going to add just one little piece to that, which is that I think there's an analogy to the hiring process. Obviously, much lower bar, but that you have to pay like $8 a month. That is kind of analogous to the hiring process. It's like, if you really want your voice to be heard on X, you need to be a verified member of the community. And in order to do that, you have to put your money where your mouth is, which, like I said, is not anything like being hired at any company, much less
Skin in the game.
Yeah, it's skin in the game. You have skin in the game. You have put in some money, and it's like, okay, so it may not be a massive amount of money, but I think that people really freaked out about that and said, this is the worst idea ever and all this stuff. And I was like, no, this is brilliant, because it gets rid of the bots and all that kind of crap. But it also means that if you really want reach, you need to put some money in behind it. And if you want the check mark, you got to be willing to be verified and all that stuff, so that it really helps people. Again, I think what you said, feeling like we're all kind of on a mission to make things better on X, is the main reason that I enjoy being there. It's like, these are smart people, these are well-meaning people, and yeah, I vehemently disagree with some of the stuff people say, but that's fine. I mean, if I'm
Yeah.
only agreeing with everybody all the time, then I'm not really learning anything, because it's like whatever. So that's great. I mean, sometimes I vehemently disagree, and then I'm like, oh, you know what? They actually have a point. So I'll think about that. It's going to be very, very interesting. And I'm not going to even get into politics about specifics, but the US election that's coming up
Oh yeah.
already, as soon as,
Cha-ching.
yeah, well, cha-ching for X, but I mean, it's going to be a very interesting litmus test.
Yeah.
How do the conversations on X go? Do we still have civil discourse? But at the same time, do you hear from people that you disagree with? Right? Because the other thing you don't want to be is like the echo chamber. Like Facebook has a tendency to be
Correct.
echo chamber. And so you only hear from the exact people that you agree with. And that's not, it's more comfortable, but it's not helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating observation. I agree with you. I think that is going to be a fantastic litmus test. And I encourage, if anybody from X, are you going to post this on X? I'm assuming part
Yeah.
of
Oh,
this is going to be.
I'm posting every
cool.
single video on X now too, as well as.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would encourage everybody at X to really ensure that it doesn't turn into the echo chamber thing, because then X will just be like every other platform. The reason why I enjoy being on X is because every day I get challenged. My worldview gets challenged.
Yeah.
And I do that on purpose. It's uncomfortable.
Right.
Like the last person I want to hear from is Robert Reich, saying something that I'm like, what the hell you just say, bro? But I still follow him because I want to be challenged. And I'm sure he's a great guy. And I'm sure if him and I were hanging out, we would have a beer or, whatever preference of drink he has. And then we'll just have a good time. And then I'd be like, wow, I really disagree with you, but you're kind of a cool dude. So that, I think having that is very, very important, extremely important for us to heal, to really heal as a, if I'm going to use the word nation, as a nation, to really get back to sort of the ideals that say, we are, this country works because we're all different. and because we're tolerant of each other. We don't have to agree, but at least we're tolerant. And the last thing we want to become is a society of intolerance. And that's what echo chambers are. And that's what getting yourself in a bubble is, That's why I follow certain people that are Tesla Q. That's why I follow people that only talk about negative things about Tesla, because I know I have a natural bias towards something, but I continually force myself to be outside of that bubble. And, and it's such a healthy exercise. And part of me says, though, John, I do think most people are like that already. I will tell you, I think a like 50 to 80% of the population, I really believe, is like that, maybe even more, that they're very open-minded. It just so happens that the fringes on either side, because they're so passionate, they will take to a social media platform and speak their mind. No different than what I do about the positive things that are happening with Tesla or self-driving or EVs. I'm passionate about those things, so that's why I'm there. Like the middle person is not really going to be on X talking about how great FSD version 12 is, but but I'm encouraged by that point. I really do think we're going to be okay, but maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm not.
We also, I know both of us have a lot of optimism bias as well. So
yes,
so there you go. Yes. But I think it is interesting, even just on a basic level. I see on the little like suggested people to follow on the right-hand side on X, like every day, I look at that and I'm like, ooh, I'm really uncomfortable following that person or that person.
Do it.
But I do it. And I highly suggest that everybody do that. Follow at least like a dozen people that you vehemently disagree with, because you're going to, number one, find out they're human beings, and they may post just dumb memes sometimes. And that's funny. It's like, okay, so not just always posting crap that you hate. And number two, you need to find out what they're thinking, right? And maybe you'll be like, oh, you know what? They actually have a point about this. It wasn't as bad as I thought originally. Or maybe you'll just be reinforced and go like, yep, they're crazy or something. But at least you've, looked and you had to look at it. So yeah.
Yeah. And at the very least, it's a mechanism to test your own thesis to see if you're going down the right path, right? Yes. Exactly. And that's very valuable. And in a worst case scenario, it's a mechanism that will prevent you from being on the platform for too long and actually go out and touch some grass, because you'll read something, you're like, ugh, and you will literally just drop, you're like, I can't believe I read that. And then you're just like, I'm wasting too much time on this platform. And then you go out and freaking have a barbecue, and all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, like the real world exists.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's happened to me more than once, It's helpful. it's good.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Farzad. I hope we covered,
Of course.
we helped people understand full self-driving a little bit, but also I think it's valuable that we ended up talking about X. I really started as a joke with that first question, but I was like, no, 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 your answer was very, very legitimate and well thought out. And I think there's a lot to think about because Elon doesn't do things by accident. And X is no more an accident than Tesla was. It's like, it's very intentional and it's all part of the same mission. So I think it's very valuable to think about that. So anyway, thank you so much for being with me for so long. And everybody, make sure that you like and subscribe to Farzad's stuff, and of course mine as well. Check out the Robots Are Coming merch that you've got, and also of course check out the Cybertruck merch that I've got. So yeah, there we go. So buy some stuff from us. Anyway, all right, everybody, have a lovely day. Oh, I forgot to ask you one more question. Are you going to the Cybertruck delivery event?
I don't know. I don't have enough credits.
Okay. Well, so everybody I
okay.
just got mine yesterday. So I was like, so people go and use his referral link.
Congrats. You don't have to. No, honestly, you don't have to. I mean, I've been to Giga Texas multiple times. You know, it's like, for me, it's if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, I'm completely okay with it. But yeah, but I'm excited for the event regardless. I'm so pumped. But yeah, thank you so much, John. This was such an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like we nerded out and geeked out super hard. I hope it was, you do such a great job explaining difficult concepts. You and James are my go-to guys, and Scott, you're my go-to guys for really understanding some of this really difficult to understand stuff. And you do great work. I really appreciate what you do. And I'm really thankful that you had me on, and I had so much fun. Thank you, John. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.